Hey, what's up guys, it's Shamrock here with another dungeon video for you. This is a 25 Algath'ar Academy, and the affixes this week are Fortified, Explosive, Bursting, and Thundering. So as you guys probably know, this season is coming to a close, so there's not a whole lot of point to this video. There's really only 1 week left, and it's tyrannical, so it's going to be quite different than this if you run it anyways. But that being said, for anybody who's, maybe a new shaman or anybody who just enjoys sort of watching the gameplay or whatever, yeah, I figured I'd make one more. So note, because it's fortified, I've basically just kept everything at regular speed. I may slow down the trash just a little bit, but because the bosses are not tyrannical, I did not slow them down because they are not going to be at their hardest form, and most of these bosses I've made video guides on anyways for tyrannical weeks. So if you are interested in knowing how to do the different strats, or how I feel like the best way to play them, you can check out those guides on my channel. So with all that being said, let's take a quick look at the talents. The only special thing about the talents for this is, first of all, I had to take Frost Shock because it is an explosive week, and second, you definitely want to go into Poison Cleansing Totem just to have it. I mean, it may not be necessary if you have a tank or some DPS who can dispel the poison off of the tree boss, but personally I always like having a little bit of control just in case anything goes wrong, so I always spec into this when going into Algath'ar. Some variations, so I actually took out Earth Elemental. I feel like that talent is not really needed on fortified weeks. It's still useful if your tank dies and you need like a pocket tank, but even then it's really only going to last a few seconds on most of the fortified trash because they hit so hard. So personally, I don't see a lot of value in Earth Elemental for this dungeon specifically, so I took that out. You basically have the choice here between Graceful Spirit and Mana Spring in order to get to Nature Swiftness. Personally, I don't have a lot of mana issues in Algath'ar Academy, so that this is a no-brainer for me, but it may be one for you, so if you want to switch those around, you could as well. Other points that you could take from if you needed to is probably the Thundershock knockup and Thunderstorm knockback. If you have a coordinated group and you're confident in their stops, you can take those away and put them somewhere else. And then also Spirit Wolf is another talent that you could probably get rid of on a fortified week like this. So as you'll see, this is pretty much my standard build. It's been like this throughout the whole week, give or take a few talents where you need Purge or Curse Dispel or Poison Cleansing Totem. You'll see for Algath'ar, so sometimes I switch between Swirling Currents and Surging Shields as which one has 2 points and which one has 1 or even none, depending on the dungeon. So for Algath'ar Academy, there's a lot of trash, especially on a fortified week, that can hit the tank really hard. And there's just a lot of trash in Algath'ar Academy. Like there's a lot of mobs that are going to be hitting your tank most of the time. So I feel like Surging Shields holds a little bit more value than Swirling Currents here, just because there's not a lot of situations, I feel like, on a fortified week for Algath'ar Academy where you're going to get full value from Swirling Currents. Okay, other than that, on the right side here, this is my pretty standard build. Some variations, if you wanted to use Downpour instead of Primordial Wave, you would just have to take those talents away from Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem and then spec in Ancestral Awakening in order to keep Tidebringer. But I have several videos that sort of explain that on my channel already, so if you are interested, go and check those out. Alright, getting into the actual dungeon. So because it's an explosive week, I did take the haste buff here. Normally that's not what I take. I normally take the versatility buff going into Algath'ar, but with an explosive week, the faster global cooldowns are very helpful. It allows you to get more explosives and get some VBS casts in as well. So that 5% haste is actually pretty cool on explosive weeks. So going into this first room with the tree trash, the biggest trouble here obviously is that there's a ridiculous amount of enemies in this room. So the amount of explosive orbs is pretty crazy. Hopefully you have a group that's at least somewhat helping you out, especially while the tank is grouping them up. But otherwise you should be able to handle it without too much issues. Okay, so you normally will lust on this pack as well. It can be really scary, but realistically, the best way to time this dungeon is to do this all in one pack. There are some tricks you can do, like for instance, we kind of hold the skitterers over there for a little bit until some of this trash is dead, and then they sort of fly in afterwards. And they will die at the same rate as the big trees, just because the big tree guys here have so much more health than everything else. But as you can see, I'm pretty much just chucking away at these explosives. I'm not doing a whole lot of DPS, unfortunately, because of that. But otherwise, I am healing people as needed. and doing whatever I can to just sort of help out with whatever the situation calls. So you'll notice I'm pretty liberal with cooldowns here. I already used Spirit Link Totem, I used Ascendance, and once these Skitterers come out and start doing some big damage, I will probably use Healing Tide as well, maybe Ancestral Guidance. Realistically, you don't need any of them for the boss, especially on a Fortified week. Even on a Tyrannical week, this boss isn't too bad. So realistically, this trash pull is probably what's going to get you. So this is where you'd want to use your cooldowns. And as you'll see, I did actually pop Healing Tide Totem there as well. For this pull as well, Thundering can really screw you over because there's so much going on. If you're like me, you'll notice when Thundering starts, but then you sort of forget about it really quickly. So if you have any, weak ores or add-ons that help with that, that's great. But if not, just try and keep, try to be mindful about your Thundering, and don't wait until the last second to clear it. Keep it for a few seconds, do what you can, and then you should make it your mission to clear it before you get screwed over by it. But there you go, not so bad. Now we get into this boss, which is. Honestly, I feel like this is one of the easier bosses. When the season first started, a little bit of history if you weren't around during then or weren't healing, this boss was one of the absolute hardest in the entire game at the time, for as far as Mythic Plus goes. It's because they had such short timings between when the ads exploded and all that stuff. So it was just really hard. Like the DPS check was pretty insane before things ramped up and became sort of unhealable and unmanageable. So at some point early in the season, they extended the time that he does between the different ad spawns, and that has basically turned it into one of the easier fights, I believe. So all you can do to help out your group here is do as much DPS as you can while still keeping everyone topped up. A good thing to do is to try and get as much DPS in as you can on the Ancient Branch that comes out, because you do want that healing circle that he does to come out as soon as possible. One of the best combos that I find for this boss is Ancestral Guidance mixed with Stormkeeper. And you really want to save your throughput cooldowns for when the branch is out, because that is when everybody has the bleed that he puts out, and that's when people are going to be ticking. It may be like, it may seem like it makes sense to use cooldowns when he does the burst forth, which is just like the big sort of chunky damage on everybody. But realistically, other than Spirit Link Totem, as long as people aren't going to die, you don't want to waste anything there, because that's not really when the damage is happening. The scarier damage happens, as you'll see right now, when that branch comes out and then people start taking the dot damage. So on a Fortified week, it's really nothing to be scared about, but on a Tyrannical week, especially on a hierarchy, these ticks can really hurt, and it can get a little bit messy if you take a long time to kill the branch. So yeah, this is where you want to save your healing cooldowns for. But otherwise, this boss is pretty clockwork. It's actually, I find it one of the most tame bosses just because it's so predictable. It's basically phase 1, phase 2, that happen one after the other. And as long as nobody does anything crazy, like, get hit by the circles or, do anything unpredictable, and as long as you can kill the branch on time, this boss is super easy. And really it just comes down to a matter of, can you kill it fast enough so that you make the timer. All right, almost done here. Oh, and you'll also notice throughout this whole fight, we try to move together as a unit, especially before he does the Germinate, so that you don't accidentally, bait the circles into anybody else. It also just helps spawn all the ads in one spot and makes it easier for them to get DPS down. There you go, not so bad. 1 death so far, and that was just on the first pull. I think somebody got a green circle, so we're doing pretty good so far. All right, now going to the platform with the Wind Dude. I'm going to be honest with you, this is probably one of my least favorite mobs in the season, just because the tornado that he puts out is pretty instant, and if you're not ready for it, it will kill you. It one-shots you even from lower difficulties on Fortified. I'm pretty sure even from like a 20, 21 maybe is when it starts to one-shot you. Thankfully, it's really predictable, so it's not that bad. It's just if you sort of, lose your head for a second or stop paying attention, even for a little bit, that thing can truck you at the wrong time, and it sucks to die to this because you, especially on Fortified, this guy's a lot of health. You want all your DPS there. So we actually did have someone die there to the tornado, so he ran back right away, which is unfortunate, but it's not the worst thing in the world just to have one person die. So the key to this trick here, the pattern, is he always does the wins after the tank buster. So as long as you're keeping track of what he did last, it kind of will allow you to be on your toes for the wins. So if he does the tank buster, you need to be ready for it. You can pop Spirit Walker's Grace in anticipation for it so that you can move right away and not have to interrupt your casting. You can go into Ghost Wolf if you want, just to be ready for it. Where it can catch you the most off guard is after that big circle that he puts down that kind of knocks you out. If he still follows the same structure, so if he did a tank buster and then does that big circle, you can count on him doing a Deadly Winds ability like pretty much right after the circle. So as long as you're ready for that, I feel like you can overcome this guy without dying. It's really just a matter of when you sort of stop paying really close attention that it's easy to get killed here. All right, moving on to the next platform with all the birds. This platform, really not so bad unless it's like a bolstering week. Actually, it can be really bad on a bursting week like this as well if you don't have a priest to master spell, just because all of these little guys will give you a stack of bursting. So it's like 8 or 9, and they usually die together, so you need to be careful there. Also, in case you're wondering, that Death Knight was trying to be clever and for some reason gripped one of the ads and then died immediately. So thankfully it did not cost us the key, but that is something that you don't want your DPS to do. And even worse, he didn't really wait for a B-res. He kind of just ran back, which is kind of a far run at this point. But like I said, no big deal. We still timed the key with at least a couple minutes left, so not so bad. All right, these big alpha eagles, very scary on bolstering weeks, but it's okay. All you have to do is just make sure you're not standing in the cone that they cast. Get as much DPS in on them as you possibly can. And if you can also interrupt them, the pull where there's one, it's not so bad, but if there is 2 of them and you miss an interrupt, it actually increases their cast speed or their attack speed by quite a bit. So it is somewhat important to get those, especially if you have a tank who's either not a paladin or B, maybe just not like a super experienced tank. You want to make sure you get those casts. But yeah, other than that, you just want to get your DPS rotation in, and that's pretty much it. Okay, last pack of birds. You got 2 alpha eagles and a bunch of the little guys. So depending on the affixes, this pull can be either really easy or really hard. Thankfully with this week on explosives and bursting, it's not so bad as long as you're keeping on top of the explosives, and if you are watching for when the little guy dies, so you know either A, when to dispel the bursting, or B, when to heal through it. But other than that, you just need to watch out for the gust cones, stay out of the way. I find if you stay closer to these guys, it makes it a little bit easier, because if they do target you with the little gust frontal, if you're close to them, you barely have to move out of the way to get out of it. But if you're far away, that triangle just gets bigger and bigger. So you don't want to be too far away from these guys, or you could put yourself in a situation where you can't get out of that. And I can confirm I've been hit by it. It will kill you. No matter what. It will like completely knock you off the platform if the actual initial damage hit doesn't kill you. All right, so going into the next boss, Crozth. Once again, I actually have a video on Crozth, so if you're going into this week in Tyrannical, which is when I'll be posting this video, you can check that out if you want like an in-depth strategy on how to handle it with Tyrannical. It's no different than the strategy I use here for Fortified. It's just a little bit more intense. There's a little bit more healing required, but normally what I tell groups, whether it be PUG or whether it's a group I'm with, is that I will handle all of the orbs that you need to throw in, so that way they can focus on DPSing, or if it's the tank, they can focus on staying alive. And you always want to work out the amount of stacks that you're doing for each phase. So standard usually for both Fortified and Tyrannical weeks is 4-4, unless you're running anything funky or some silly shenanigans. You could maybe do 5 on the first one, but 4-4 is usually safe, and that's really all you need. So I'm not a big, I don't really use weak auras or timers or anything like that. As if you watch my videos, you've probably seen that. However, I do use a thundering timer for this dungeon, starting actually a couple days ago when somebody asked me to, just because for this boss it can really help you optimize when you throw the ball in to stun the bird, because he does take more damage. So if you can line that up even a little bit with a thundering, it's good. It can really help you crank this boss a little bit faster. So most groups will do fire first. In fact, I don't think I've ever done a group this season where you do like the wind first, unless I think they did that when I was watching MDI for a little bit. But just a heads up though, if you do the wind side first, it will not give him a damage taken buff. It's only the fire side that does that. So if you are saving cooldowns or trying to line it up with thundering or whatever, just make sure you're doing the fire side, because the wind side, it doesn't really do anything to him at all. All it does is put it through the phase where the tornadoes start coming. Okay, if you are talented for Spirit Wolf, the Screeches are great if you're worried about them, like if you're worried about one-shotting you, or maybe you're low health or whatever. As long as you have everybody else topped up, I do advise going into Ghost Wolf if you're talented into Spirit Wolf, because every second you'll take, you'll get that 5% stacking DR, up to a total of 20%, I believe it is. So if you get that even for a couple of seconds before the Screech goes off, you'll just ensure that you don't die. And then for the fourth Screech, if you are doing 4/4, make sure you're talented into the, I believe it's called Plains Traveler, which is the Astral Shift augment talent that makes it so the cooldown is shortened by 30 seconds or something like that. So if you do have that talent, you will have Astral Shift up for both stacks of 4, which is great. And you'll see from my strategy for handling the balls, I like to throw 2 of them right away, so that the third one, I basically just grab a ball and I hang on to it, and then I can put it in whenever I need to. If you are doing this, however, just make sure your group is aware that you're doing the balls so that they don't accidentally throw one and phase it early, which I have had happen this season. And it's not fun because, yeah, if you start getting the wins before like 20%, ideally 20% is where you want the wins to come out on like a tyrannical week. You'll notice on this week, because it's fortified and because we're cranking the boss, we actually don't need the wins phase to happen until he's almost dead anyways. And even then, I probably could have just left it, but maybe I do leave it. Sorry, I don't remember. Okay, yeah, I do throw it into the very last second, but I probably could have held on to it until he died there. And then once the wins happen, this is a great time to pop Spearwalker's Grace, and then you just got to run around and dodge. Once again, Fortified, we killed him really quick, so we didn't really get to see it. If you do want to see how I handle that, there is a Crozth video on my channel. All right, so now we're going into the second last area. This is the Veximus area. Tanks will usually have somewhat different routes on how they handle this place. It really just depends on what they pull with what. So we skipped that pack with the Mana Fiends, and I believe there's like a Battle Axe there too, which is nice because that pack kind of sucks, especially if you want to pull it with other things. So to save on time, we skip that, and then we do this big pull with the big worm and the other two, the Battle Axe and the staff. So you'll probably know by now, because this was figured out pretty early in the season, but you can LOS the lunge that the big worm does. So hopefully your tank is tanking these enemies in a position where you are able to sort of hang around the bridge, and then you can just sort of dip around the corner here and dodge that. Just make sure that if you have the thundering debuff like I do now, that you're able to get there and back. And also, this is a good spot to save Astral Shift for if you can. If you're ever in a situation, whether you're running Thundering or maybe the tank's not tanking it in a great spot, or you just find yourself out of position for a second, when that guy's going to lunge on you, popping Astral Shift is great, especially if it's like a bolstering week or a raging week where he's all of a sudden, is doing more damage than he should be doing, and he targets you with that. Having Astral Shift in your back pocket is great. You probably shouldn't need it for any other things that happen during that trash pull. Okay, and because we're a little bit worried about time here, we do sort of chain these pulls, which once again, no problem. It's not like there's bolstering or raging or anything where things are going to start doing a lot more damage. As long as we stay on top of our interrupts here, this pack should be fine. Just note that if someone does get the mana bomb thing that the Mana Fiends cast on them on a fortified week, especially like 22, 23, 24 higher, it does do a lot of damage. So if it gets put on you and you have Astral Shift, that's a great reason to pop it. And if it gets put on someone else, you kind of need to start funneling your heals into them. Worst case scenario, if you're struggling and you don't know what to do, you can pop a spirit link, and that will save them. So right there, it probably would have been a great where I just died. That would have been a great spot to pop spirit link to save myself. But my brain clearly wasn't thinking that fast, so I died. But I had reincarnate up, so it wasn't that big of a deal. All right, so a lot of tanks will grab a few of these small worms and then we'll jump up over the ledge and pull them into the packs up here. I believe we skipped this big worm entirely, which is great because they take a lot of time and they're not very efficient for the percent they give. But we are pulling some of these little guys. So these are unfortified. These packs can be scary. And sometimes the tank will even pull 2 of these packs together, even if you don't have lust up, which once again can be scary. You just really need to be on top of your interrupts. And because it's an explosive week, you also need to be on top of that as well. So there's just a lot to be focusing on. So this is really a safety first scenario. Like you want to get as much DPS out as you can, as always, but really you want to be focusing on interrupts for these packs. You want to be focusing on keeping people above, 70, 80% health so that nothing can accidentally one-shot them, like the surge casts or the leaps that the little guys do. And really you just want to go all out. Don't be afraid about using some of your cooldowns for these packs. Realistically, for the first set of mana bombs on Veximus, like all you really need, you don't even need a cooldown. As long as you have like Primordial Wave or something up, you can handle it. So if you need to burn through every single cooldown to get through these ads without dying, go for it. Don't be afraid about don't be afraid of Veximus, especially on a fortified week. Now, if it's a tyrannical week, slightly different. You may want to save at least a couple just to have at the beginning of the fight in case you need it. But most tyrannical weeks are like a very different route than this anyways. So sometimes you'll usually have lust up for when Veximus happens, although sometimes you won't. So just, you want to keep in mind the route you're doing and what you think you're going to need. But obviously on a fortified week, these trash packs hit really hard, especially if you're not getting the interrupts. So use what you got to use to keep people alive here. All right, quick sidebar. This is the last week with explosive ever, as they are getting rid of the affix. I am probably one of the only, according to everybody I talk to, I'm one of the only people who's actually sad about that. I think explosive is a lot of fun. I think it puts a lot of agency and responsibility on the healers, especially because a lot of people think it's a healer affix. So, you sometimes don't get a lot of help. But personally, I don't know. I think it's fun. I think it's like a mini game of whack-a-mole. It adds a lot of complexity to your own rotation because you need to figure out, make snap judgments on whether to sacrifice the global to get the explosive or let the explosive explode and do whatever else you need to do. And I get it. It's frustrating when you're already trying to do so much, especially on bigger pulls. But as long as you have a group that is at least somewhat helping you out, I really think this is a really fun affix. And I'm actually very sad that they're getting rid of it. I hope that one day they bring it back. And, sure, maybe they have to tweak it a little bit. But yeah, anyways, that's a little bit of my rant there. All right, Veximus on Tyrannical and Fortified, both can be a pretty scary boss, especially on the higher difficulties. I do have a couple of Veximus videos out on my channel for tyrannical weeks, so you can go ahead and check those out if you want like in-depth strategies. But really, my best piece of advice for Veximus would be it's all about cooldown management, both big and small cooldowns. And by small cooldowns, I mean things like Primordial Wave, trinkets, racials, whatever you have in your arsenal to use here. You basically just want to save something for each mana bomb ability, and you want to be watching for the overlap as well. So if you have a pug group that is not communicating, it's likely you're going to get a bad overlap at some point, usually towards the end of the fight. So just make sure you're saving a personal defensive for that, and maybe even a throughput defensive so that you can make sure other people don't die, the ones who maybe didn't save a personal for it. But if you have a group who is somewhat communicating, like I believe this one was, I think we were in Discord for this dungeon actually, you can manipulate this fight so that you do not get an overlap. And how you do that is just by letting the Veximus absorb one of the arcane orbs that are floating in at some point during the fight. Hopefully it's during a point where not other damage isn't happening, which once again, if you're communicating that makes it a lot easier. And actually, if you're watching, that is where we let our orb go in right there. And once again, it was during a time where there was not a lot of other damage. I had already healed everybody up from the mana bombs, so it was all good there. Okay, so we did lust there as well. I lusted as soon as it came up. So when we were communicating, we were trying to make sure that we got every lust that you can get in this dungeon. So when you start Algath'ar Academy, if you lust on the first pull, and then you play very quickly and get to Crozth on time, and then, you know, just basically lust on CD, you can get an extra lust at the end of the dungeon. Now, for Fortified weeks, I personally feel like sometimes it's better to save that lust for the last pull before the last boss, or, you know, one of those pulls where you have those like spinny guys and the invokers, all those little dragon dudes, because usually a tank will have to do a really big pull there. So having lust just to get that down quickly and to avoid what can happen if it sort of gets prolonged is great. It's actually probably what I recommend. I don't think you actually need the fourth lust to do this dungeon personally. However, we were, you know, a little bit worried about time, so we decided to just lust on cooldown there. Funny story though is that we actually did this so fast that we didn't have time for the last lust. Like I think we got there and lust was still had a minute or so on cooldown. So one of those things where, you know, you kind of just have to make the decision, hopefully as a group, and then hope whatever you decide works out. And I'll let you know. So when we get to the pull that I would have preferred to lust on, I'll let you know. But honestly, even this pull on the bridge is a good one to lust on as well. But if you don't have lust here, I would say go all out with cooldown. So because you're coming right off of Veximus, you may not have anything super available. Thankfully, I saved Slink because I knew this pull was coming up. So I basically popped that at the start to make sure nobody died after we were running from the arcane rain that the staff does. Other than that, just get as many interrupts in as you can. And same thing, it's priority safety first. You need to get your kills out, get your interrupts out, knockups, all that stuff. Make sure people are living. And then after you're sure about all of that, that's when you try to get all of your DPS in. Think of it this way, if a DPS dies because you're trying to DPS, you're going to be doing overall less DPS than you would had that DPS stayed alive, because they are going to be doing a lot more damage than you can possibly do. Even if you're playing, you know, amazing and you have the best DPS rotation ever, you know, an actual DPS spec is always going to out DPS you, especially on a pull like that with a lot of enemies. Okay, so this is the other pull that I would consider using lust on if you aren't going for the 4 lust strat. Just because there's so many things here. So you want them to die quickly, especially because it's an explosive week, and you'll see actually we almost bricked this key here because of the explosives on the stairs. But yeah, this is a great spot to use lust if you have it. Other than that, you really want to make sure you're interrupting these arcane missiles as much as you possibly can. They hurt and they do not always target the tank. If you get the mana bombs, you can also target them, like you can go near the enemies and they will do damage to them as well. So you'll see there, we had like 2 or 3 explosives go off at the same time there. They were kind of hidden in the stairs and I didn't see them, but you know, nobody else saw them as well. So thankfully that did not kill all of us and we are fine. We also had a battle reserve level, so we were able to use that right away and continue killing this group. Yeah, but see, like even watching this, like I don't know, I feel like it's so much fun trying to get those explosives as well as trying to do everything else. Like it just adds such a layer of complexity. The only thing it really does do that I don't like is it really takes away from your DPS, but I mean, that's just part of the affix, right? Like some of the affixes like Sanguine or Bolstering or, you know, whatever, they add time in their own respective ways. And I feel like Explosive adds time in the dungeon, sort of unseen time by the globals that you and the DPS sort of need to spend on it. Which is one of the reasons why they delegate it as a healer affix, is because the globals that you spend on it are not worth as much DPS as the globals that a DPS might have to spend on it. Okay, almost done. So depending on your situation, how much time you have left, most tanks will pull this last set of mobs into the last boss, just because this last boss by itself is not so bad. So it's one of those bosses where you can do a pull like this into it without worrying too much about things going crazy. That being said, it still is a little bit scary and a little bit risky to do. So actually looking back, like we timed this I think with about 2 minutes left, so we might have been okay to do the trash pack by itself, but realistically I don't know who wants to take the chance on that, especially after you do a full dungeon unless you have like 7 minutes left going into this section. So I think the tank made the right call here to sort of bring everything together. Very important, if you do pull this last set of mobs with the last boss, when the mobs do their spinny thing, they basically do like the whirlwind and it hurts a lot. It can very quickly and easily wipe you if they do that while the boss sucks you in like she did just there. So it's really important that everybody be vigilant as to when these guys are doing their whirlwind, and so that gets interrupted when she pulls you in, if those happen to overlap, because they can kill you very quickly, especially if you have 2 of them doing it at the same time. Other than that, you just want to make sure you're keeping interrupts on the invokers. You really want to be watching the breath from this boss. That's probably the only really scary thing that she does, especially at the beginning. This fight does get a little bit more hectic towards the end, but towards the end, all of these mobs will be dead, hopefully, so you don't have to worry about it too much. If you have a priest in the group, mind controlling the Restorer, which you can see it's right behind me right now and it's mind controlled, is great. It actually gives a really insane haste buff when it's mind controlled. And it's also one less thing you have to kill. So if you don't need the percentage, and you can, even if you do need the percentage, you can mind control it for at least some of the fight and then, you know, kill it towards the end. But it just takes some of the, stress off from doing that full pull with the last boss. All right, so Astral Breath strikes again. If you're standing far away from the boss, that breath can be really hard to dodge, especially if you like lose focus for a second and don't realize they're about to do it. So just, you know, make sure that you're careful with that. Other than that, try to watch how many stacks you and your friends have of the debuff that she puts out, because once you get 3 stacks, you drop a circle, and then those circles start, you know, throwing the balls everywhere. So you just want to be wary of when that's happening, so that you can bait those circles into the correct spots. Because you have a dispel, and you sometimes have the ability to control where people are going to drop that 3rd circle, you know, depending on when you dispel them. You can use that to your advantage as well. And hopefully they are paying attention as well, so that they run out when they need to. The best strats for dropping these circles are to either drop them as close together as possible, so you have, you know, the balls coming from one spot. The other strat that you can do with dropping those is dropping them, you know, next to pillars or next to walls, so that some of the balls that do come out from them, you don't even have to worry about, because they immediately hit a wall and then disappear. All right, so we're out of battle reses here, but we have a good 2.5 minutes left, and the boss is like at 40%. So we're in pretty good shape here. We just have to make sure we don't die from the breath, which, if I'm remembering correctly, we don't have any more deaths on this fight, so it's pretty easy. This boss on Tyrannical can be a little bit scarier than it gets credit for just towards the end. So if you have a really messy pull and people are dropping circles all over the place and nobody's really paying attention to that, this can get pretty hectic towards the end on a Tyrannical week, just because you have so many balls coming out. And it's not even dodging them by themselves that's the hard part. It's trying to dodge them while she pulls you in, while trying to focus on the breath, while trying to focus on, you know, who has what, and also, you know, the tank having to move it around. Like it can get very hectic. And personally, like, we're not, even me right there, we're not dropping the circles in the best spots. So once again, though, thankfully only Fortified week, and she's dead anyway, so we're good. But yeah, there you go. That was a 25 Algath'ar Academy. I feel like this dungeon is really spooky. It's hard to get right. In theory, like, if you take each individual part of this dungeon, it's not hard, I would say. But putting all of those parts together and having to do all of it perfectly, I definitely feel like my experience has told me that this dungeon is one of the harder ones to time throughout this season, especially on the hierarchies, where you need lots of DPS, you need everything to go perfectly, you need the tank to know exactly what they're doing, when they're doing, what they're pulling, all that stuff. So yeah, I was pretty happy to time this. You know, only 1 more week left, and then we will probably never do this dungeon again, unless they do some sort of weird thing for, you know, the season 3 or season 4, where they bring them back in. But anyways, Algath'ar Academy, it's been awesome, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And yeah, if you did, check out some of the other videos I have on the channel. But yeah, anyways, take care, and I'll see you next time.